Hi, my name is Amelia, and I'm an art teacher with Artists for Kids in the North Vancouver School District. Welcome to the Gordon Smith Gallery. This year, we're bringing you the AFK ArtReach video series. And in this series, we feature art activities and artworks, mostly inspired by the theme of play and by the artwork that you see in the gallery around me. And many of the art activities that we share can be carried out in the classroom, at home, and even outdoors. And we share these videos every other week and post them on the AFK website. Today I'll be sharing with you this sculpture by the Canadian artist Victor Cicansky. And inspired by this sculpture, we will be creating our own paper sculptures representing tree fruit. And we'll consider the following questions. Where is our fruit grown? And how can we represent textures using paint? Victor Cicansky is from the province of Saskatchewan, and he creates sculptures using clay as well as bronze. And in his artwork, he often represents his life on the prairies. He represents everything from fruits and vegetables and gardening tools such as shovels to canning jars and even outhouses. And he often brings a great sense of humor and playfulness to the art that he creates. But he explores more serious topics that are important to him, such as the question of where our food comes from. Who grows it? How do we interact with our food, and how do we preserve it? But he often brings a playfulness to these more serious topics. Take a look at this sculpture by Victor Cicansky. What stands out to you about it? What kind of fruit is growing on this tree? The sculpture is called Mountain Pear Bonsai. Do you know what a bonsai is? Bonsai is a Japanese art form which uses specific techniques to produce in containers small trees that mimic the shape and look of full-size trees. And fruit trees can actually be kept miniature by using techniques such as pruning, wiring, and repotting. So even pear trees can actually be grown as bonsai. What kind of details has the artist included that make the fruit and the tree look realistic? Notice the colors he's used and the textures. The sculpture is three-dimensional, which means that it's a solid object that takes up space and can be viewed from multiple angles. If you look closely at the fruit, you'll see that it's smooth, but the artist has used two-dimensional painting techniques to make the pears look real and to make them look like they have texture. If you look closely at the trunk and the branches, you can see that the artist has used three-dimensional sculpting techniques to make these parts look real. These branches and the trunks have actual bumpy textures to them rather than just being a smooth surface. Now look closely at the bottom of the sculpture and notice the shovel digging into the ground. Why do you think the artist included the shovel in his sculpture? Today, inspired by this sculpture by Victor Cicansky, we will create paper sculptures representing tree fruit. And once you've finished your individual sculptures, they could be combined together to create a collaborative class tree. The following are the materials that you will need to create your paper fruit sculptures. Now, to begin your project, you could start by doing a brainstorm as a class and listing many different kinds of fruits that grow on trees. And for the purposes of our project today, I would suggest sticking to fruits that have a rounder shape. And once your class has come up with this list of tree fruits, now you will pick which fruit you would like to represent today in a paper sculpture. And once you've chosen your fruit, you will then choose your white piece of paper that you're going to use to create your fruit with. So if you've chosen a smaller, rounder fruit, such as an apple or a plum or a peach, then you would want to use one of the smaller sheets of white paper. But if you've chosen a fruit that is sort of longer and maybe a little bit bigger, such as a pineapple or a mango, then you will want to use a white sheet of paper that is a little bit bigger, a bit longer. And then each person will also need one smaller sheet of paper that's about 7 inches by 9 inches in size. And this could be brown paper or white paper. And once you've got your paper, you've chosen your fruit, you're ready to start painting. Now I have put out my materials and I am ready to begin painting. As I said before, you could do this project with just the primary colors and you could then mix your colors on your paper, but I have a few extra colors as well. So I've decided to create an apple today. So I have a real apple that I can look at for inspiration. And one of the things I really noticed about Victor Cicansky's sculpture and the way that he showed his pears is that the details that he included on those pears really helped them to look realistic. So if I look closely at Victor Cicansky's pears, as you can see here, we can see that he didn't just use one color to paint them. You can see yellows and reds and maybe even little bits of black on them. And he's applied that paint in a way to create texture. He's created lots of tiny little dots and things. And so I'm going to think about the way that he's done this as I create my painting today. And I'm going to look closely at this apple, seeing that underneath there's some light yellow and on top are some reds and kind of oranges, even a bit of a green in the middle there. So I'll keep my apple there, and to begin today, we're thinking about this big white piece of paper as the skin of our fruit, and later we'll be shaping this skin to be creating our sculpture. And to begin with, we'll want to start with some of the lighter colors that are on our fruit. So I'm going to look at my apple, notice that there's a layer of yellow within that apple, and I'm going to start painting yellow on my white sheet of paper. And I'm using a slightly thicker brush to do this. I want to cover lots of space. And because I have some white, I'm also going to add white to my paint, because if I look closely at my apple, I notice it's sort of a lighter yellow. Now I'm looking at the red that I see on top of the yellow on my apple. So I'll start to use some red paint, but I'm going to think about not using too much paint to begin with. I want to create sort of a lighter layer of red on top of my yellow, and I don't really want to cover all of my yellow with the red either. I notice if I look at my apple that I can still see a lot of the yellow coming through that red color. And maybe I'll even go back and take a little bit of the yellow paint again to blend together some of the red color and the yellow, creating a bit of an orange tone. And notice I'm also trying to press off some of the water from my brush after I wash my brush so that I'm not applying really, really wet paint to my painting. Instead, I actually want my brush to be a little bit drier, which will help me to get some interesting different textures on top of the yellow. And I might try to use my brush in sort of different ways to get different textures. I could try dabbing at my paper rather than brushing the paint on. And I do notice some little spots of red, little dots of red on my apple. So I'm going to use a smaller brush as well and experiment with my red paint and applying it, adding little dots of red to different sections of my paper. And I did notice there was even a little bit of green on my apple. So again, I'm going to try to squeeze off some of the water from my brush and get just a little bit of green paint on my brush and add just ever so lightly some little sections of green. Now, once I've painted my large sheet of paper, the skin of my fruit, I will then paint this smaller sheet of paper, and this will become the leaf or leaves for your fruit. And again, we can look back at Victor Cicansky's leaves that he created on his sculpture. And one thing that I really notice about his leaves is that they're not painted with just one shade of green. There's darker sections, lighter sections. I think it's even incorporating some gray and some black, which to me makes it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to start painting my smaller sheet of paper with green. But instead of just using only one shade of green, I'm going to incorporate a little bit of black. And then if you can let this side dry for a little while, that is best. And then what you can do is turn over your sheet of paper and paint the other side green as well. So you'll need to let your painted paper dry, and when the paper is dry, you are ready to move on to your next step. I'm switching now to another piece of paper that I painted. For this paper, I was looking at a picture of a pineapple, and that's how I created the texture that you see here. So I have my painted pineapple paper, and for this one you can see I used one of the larger, longer sheets of paper, and I also have my painted green piece of paper that I'm going to use for leaves. And so I can begin gluing, and in order to do that I need some white glue, a brush. I will also need 2 binder clips like these. You can see they're bigger binder clips. If you don't have these, you could also use wooden clothes pegs or possibly even 2 rubber bands. So each student will need 2 of one of these tools. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is create kind of a tube shape with my piece of paper. So in the end, it will look like this. And the way that I'm going to do this is I will brush on a strip of glue just along the edge of my piece of paper. And you can see I'm using a pretty thick layer of glue. I really want my sculpture to be held together well. And then all I'll do is bring the other side around and overlap it about 2 centimeters or so over top of that strip of glue. And then I want to press it down all the way along so I know those 2 parts of the paper have really joined together. And now I have this tube of paper, which is kind of the first step in creating my fruit sculpture. So I'm going to let that glue dry for just a little while, and I'm going to move on to creating my leaf or leaves. And so for my pineapple, I'm going to be creating many leaves. If you look at a pineapple, a picture of a pineapple, you'll see it has lots of sort of sharp pointy leaves coming out the top of it. If you're creating a fruit like an apple or a peach, you could just create one leaf like you can see I did for this sculpture. So for my pineapple, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm going to begin by creating some lines to show these long kind of pointy leaves that I will later cut out. Here you can see how I drew just one big leaf onto this green piece of paper. Once you've drawn your leaf shape on your green piece of paper, you'll then need some scissors and you can cut that shape out. So for my pineapple, I have a lot of these long, sharp, pointy green leaves. Here I've cut out just one leaf that I will attach on to this sculpture. And you can see I left one really long piece at the end, which will help me to attach it to my sculpture later on. So make sure you try to add this on when you're drawing a leaf like this one. So I could take a black oil pastel or a black crayon and add on some of these extra details to my leaf. So now that we have drawn and cut out our leaf shape and perhaps added some extra details to them, we can set our leaves aside for now and check our a large piece of paper and to see if the glue has dried a bit. My glue has dried quite a bit in that time that I was working on my leaves, so I'm ready to move on to my next step. And for this step, I'll need my glue, a brush, and a binder clip or a clothes peg or rubber band. And so for the next step, I'm going to paint on a strip of glue on the inside edge of my tube that I've created. And you can see again, I'm putting on a pretty thick layer of glue. And then what I'm going to do is crumple this edge together. And I'll be crumpling my paper up a little bit as I do this. And that's okay, this is part of creating our three-dimensional shape of our fruit. So now I'm holding it together. It almost looks like the end of a balloon where you blow up the balloon. And so I want this to dry and hold together in this way. So that's where our binder clip comes in. And I'm going to open it up and squeeze together that end that I have glued. And at this point, you can reach your hand inside your shape and even press down a little bit gently to kind of shape the bottom of your piece of fruit. And here's where you can start to see the shape of your sculpture coming together. And so for the next step, we will be stuffing our sculpture. And so what you will need for this next step is some recycled paper. And I just have some kind of crumply pieces of recycled paper from our paper recycling bin. And what I'm going to do next is crumple it up and stuff it inside my sculpture. For the next step, I'm going to, again like we did on the bottom, paint on a nice thick layer of white glue on the inside of my sculpture, going around the whole edge. And once you've painted the glue all around the inside edge, if you're adding a stem to your sculpture, you will then take your stick and put it inside the top, crumple together your paper like this, like we did on the bottom, kind of like it looks like a balloon where you blow up your balloon. And then you will hold that stick in place using a binder clip. I'm actually not wanting to add a stick to this sculpture. Instead, I would like to take these leaves that I've cut out. While that is drying, I'm going to put on that binder clip to hold it in place. And now, if you created a fruit with a stem like this one, now is when you could glue on your leaves. So you'll want to let the glue on your sculpture dry even overnight. And then you could come back and remove the clips that are holding it in place. And once you've done that, your fruit sculpture is complete. And so to display your class's completed fruit sculptures, one way you could do this is, as a class, you could draw a giant outline of a tree on brown craft paper, including many branches in this tree, and then cut out this outline, tack it onto a bulletin board, and then your individual fruit sculptures could be tacked or taped onto the branches of this tree. I've made a little example on my whiteboard here in the studio to show you how you might do this. So when all of your class's fruit sculptures are complete, stop and take a look at all of them. And what kind of fruits did you and your classmates create? And where do these fruits come from? Do they all grow in BC or in Canada, or do they come from other parts of the world? And if so, where do these fruits come from? And also take a close look at the kind of painting techniques that you and your classmates used. What kind of techniques did people use to show the different textures on the skin of their fruit? So we would always love to see here at AFK the finished artwork that you create. And you could take pictures of your art and send them to us by email, or you could share them on Instagram using the hashtag AFK ArtReach. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had fun creating fruit sculptures. And please do check back in the coming weeks for more AFK ArtReach videos.